Okay, so we're going to talk about now is remote management. Right now I'm looking at my server. I'm actually at the keyboard and monitor of this server, and I have direct access to not only the Active Directory users and computers, but to configure this local machine. Pretty much everything from here. I'm right at the server console. This is not the common case. Most people don't have a server console on their desk. It's usually sitting in the back room somewhere, and we want to be able to manage them without having to go to that dark closet that's heavily secured and very cold often. We want to be able to access it right from our computer. So I'm going to show you two different ways of working with this. So we're probably going to just pretend that this doesn't even exist. So I'm just going to, just work with Windows 10. And there's two ways I want to show this to you. The first way is using one of Microsoft's tools. It's called Remote Server Administration Tool. And what it allows you to do is it's actually install some software on your desktop that allows you to do a lot of the server manager things. That's all it allows you to do, though, is server manager things like users and groups and domains and group policies and whatever. It doesn't give you any access to the file system or to any other control panel or desktop or anything like that. It's purely meant for remote server administration. So this is one of the two ways that we're going to talk about. This is what in all the Microsoft courses talk about, which they want you to learn. And then we'll talk about another way, which a lot of local employers end up using. So I'm going to log in as an administrator. Well, actually, it should be GOPA administrator. Because we don't have anybody else having any rights to do administration right now. So we'll just log in as the administrator on a local computer. So again, I'm on my local computer here. My server is some far distant off location, and I want to be able to manage it. And that's not even so much the server itself, but the Active Directory. I want to manage Active Directory. How you do it is, once this launches, we're going to end up needing a file that's going to be out in the classroom server. It's a pretty small file. You can download it to your portable drive if you want to. But go ahead and grab it first of all. It's going to be under Students. And then under Students, it's under Class Files. And then Server Administration. And then RSAT, which is a Remote Server Administration Tool. Now, this really isn't an installer program. What this really is a service pack. This is a Windows service pack. If I own Microsoft, this is something I'd change. It is Remote Server Administration Tool, but it's installed as a service pack. So it's going to look like a service pack and act like a service pack. It's just going to give us the tools that we need. It's also extremely specific to the version of Windows. So in this case, we have RSAT for Windows 7, RSAT for Windows 8.1, and then we have RSAT for Windows TH, which is Windows 10. If I own Microsoft, that's another thing I'd change. Why not name it 10? But anyways, it's Windows TH. So we need a copy of that. So I'm just going to, right-click on it and say Copy, and put it down to my portable drive. I'll throw it in with my ISO files, just for a place to put it, even though it's not an ISO file, and it's super small. I mean, you should be able to download this in just a couple seconds. Not a big deal. Once you have it on your drive, you want to get it over to your Windows 10 computer. Now, in real life, you could put that on a thumb drive, you could go to a network share or whatever. In the virtual world, we can literally just drag and drop it over to our desktop. So it makes that whole network connectivity a little bit easier. So in the virtual world, as long as you have VMware Workstation running, the VMware tools running, you should be able to copy files from a folder onto the desktop of a virtual machine. So once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and double click and run it. And you can see it's a Windows Update standalone installer. And it's going to do this Windows Update KB, no reference to RSAT anywhere. It's all kind of hidden, and yes, I want to do that. So it's going to copy the package and install it. If you accept the license, go ahead and click Accept and let it do the installation. And it actually does take a little while to do this. Another thing to be aware of, I guess while this is installing, is that The different versions of the Windows RSAT only support certain versions of the Windows Server. So as the Windows servers increased, like 2012 and 2012 R2 and 2016, you needed a corresponding Windows desktop to correspond with it. In fact, let me just try to bring up the screen here. One perfect example is if you are running, I believe it's 2012 R2, you had to have a Windows 8 RSAT. Now, if anybody knows anything about the enterprise environments, nobody ran Windows 8, or very, very few did. They would run a Windows 7 environment, and then maybe have Windows 2012 or R2 servers. You could not use Windows 7 RSAT to manage that Active Directory in Windows 2012 R2. So you had to have a Windows 8.1. When you're dealing with 2016, you have to have a Windows 10. Now in our case, that's okay because Windows 10 came out a year before 2016 came out, and people are migrating to 10 and going to 2016, so you're okay. But it doesn't go upwards. Just like you couldn't use Windows 8 to manage 2016 as well. That's not allowed at all. It does go downward though. So Windows 10 RSAT is able to go back to Windows 2016, 2012, and sort of everything backwards. So the client has to be equal or above the server equivalent that it's working with.
It's like VMware.
I have a feeling that it's so specific because it is a service pack and it makes that connection super secure. And, you know, I'm not sure. It's looking for something very, very specific for the types of authentication between this client and the server. So it makes it a super secure connection. So let me go back to my Windows 10-1. So, okay, so it did install it. So I click restart. By the way, for this, I'm just running DC1, DC2 in Windows 10. And just like an update, it's doing a, you know, it's finished the update. Once it restarts, you'll come back to the login screen. I'm going to log back in as administrator again because, like I said, we haven't delegated any other rights to anybody else. Administrator is the only one that can do this stuff anyways right now. Come next week, we'll be able to have other people log in. And once the service pack is installed, we really don't need the service pack anymore on this virtual machine. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to put it in the recycle bin. And then I'm going to empty the recycle bin. But if you keep it on your desktop, it doesn't hurt anything at all. Now, it doesn't do anything different. You probably haven't, like, it doesn't show anything. There's no icons, no applications, but it actually did. If you click on the Start button and you scroll on down under the S's, it'll say Server Manager is new. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to right-click on Server Manager, and I'm going to go under More, and I'm going to pin it to the taskbar. And now it's going to have the same icon that's going to be on the kind of server. It's the Server Manager. Clicking on Server Manager, I get kind of an abbreviated version of what I have on a Server Manager. Obviously, I can't manage the local server because there isn't a local server, but I can add other servers to manage. There's a couple ways of doing this. I like working over here. I like right-clicking on all my servers and saying Add Servers. We did this before when we added DC2 to be managed from DC1. I can do a Find Now because it's going to search all of the domain. And it finds all my computers and all my servers, and I'm going to put it under, I'm going to choose DC1 and DC2 because I don't have data running right now. I can always come back and add that later. And I click the little arrow to push it over to the selected computers. So this is the same process you used before. Now when I look at all servers, you can start seeing anything that's been installed on any of the servers ends up being picked up. So Active Directory Domain Services, DNS is there, File and Storage Services are there. You can see what the IP address is, the last time it's been updated as far as this screen. I have all the events. So here's some errors that happened. Here are services that are installed and running or stopped. I can start and stop services on that machine on DC1. I can switch over to DC2, and now I see the errors or notifications on there, the services on there, and kind of all kinds of stuff, different things. This is also where I can, manage the servers by right-clicking on it and saying add a role or feature. So say I want to make one of these a web server. So from my client, I can install a new service over there or remove a service. I can right-click on here and let's see here. I guess let me go to manage, remove roles and features. And then I want to remove a feature from DC2. So I can just click through there and remove a feature. So there's all kinds of things you can do. Remember, this is not a remote desktop. I can't see what's in the desktop. I can't get to the control panel. I can't do those kinds of things, but at least I can manage the system. Most importantly, I have access to all the Active Directory tools. So from my client, from my regular Windows 10 desktop, I now have full access to all the users, all the groups. I have, later on I'll have access to the group policies. So everything's kind of here that I'm working with. It gives you a nice tool. So this is what Microsoft promotes. It's in all their curriculum. We definitely need to cover it because it's out there. Not many people end up using this. I'm not sure if it's just because it's a weird install or just limited, that you can only do Active Directory administration, not actual machine configuration. But it is super secure. It's very stable and very rock solid. The other alternative to working with remotely managing a computer, a lot more common, is to use remote desktop. Using a remote desktop has definite advantages, but there's some disadvantages, and probably the biggest one is security. Remote desktop uses RDP protocol, which everybody knows and everybody uses for all kinds of stuff, which by its very nature makes it a little bit more insecure in that it kind of gives you a big target to go for. So if you know that remote desktop protocol, RDP, is enabled, people are going to go after that. So it does make it a little bit more vulnerable, but it makes it super easy and convenient for administration, especially if you're trying to manage the actual physical server itself. So to do that, the first thing that we need to do, so I'm going to go ahead and close Server Manager. The first thing we need to do is actually enable it on our servers. So if I go to Domain Controller 1 and I look at configure this local server under my Server Manager dashboard, you'll see that we have remote desktop, and remote desktop is disabled, and that's for security reasons. You don't want anything open that you're not going to be using. Why leave a really big hole? So if you click on it, it just brings up the system properties. You could get to this. In fact, it's the same dialog box that you use to join the domain. It's just the computer name is the first tab. The next tabs over are the remote access. So under here it says don't allow the remote connections to this computer, and we want to allow it, and so we're going to allow remote connections to this computer. But then you want to say, who do you want to allow access? And for right now, we're not going to do a whole lot with this because if you notice, administrator already has access. So you do not have to define administrator to give access. Administrator is already going to have access. As soon as you say allow, administrator is going to have access. But say we did want to add somebody, I'm thinking that the network administrator would be like a really good person to maybe add. And I don't add, hang on. So let's go back here, network administrator. And so there's that group where Lauren would be a member of. And again, you don't want to put people anywhere. You want to use groups for everything whenever at all possible. So then you can put people in and out of that role. So what you're basically saying is that in addition to the administrator, whoever's in that role of network administrator group can also do remote desktop. So it's enabled. If you notice, it doesn't refresh all the time. Refreshing is just, I don't know. You have to click the little refresh button, and then it shows that it's enabled. So it can be often delayed for refreshing. So click the refresh. So now it's really nice that I can just switch over to my Windows 10-1. And now think of, again, that server's way off in a far distant land. I can click Start on my Windows desktop to start typing in remote desktop. Every version of Windows that I've ever worked with in the last, I don't know, for as long as I can remember, has remote desktop client already built into it. And then you can name it, because we have DNS running, we can connect to our computer called DC1. You still have to log into it, so it's going to the administrator. And now this is remote desktop. Remote desktop is not the same as a remote control. And that's kind of a big difference here. If I switch over to my DC1, I'm going to get logged out. I do not have access. You cannot both people see the same screen at the same time. Just to kind of look at this, so here, let's do it this way. I'll just bring them up on different screens so you can see what happens. So I'll launch another instance of VMware Workstation, put that over there, and we'll drag DC1 over to the other screen. So DC1's on the left screen, and Windows 10 is on the right screen. Yeah. So that's my server over here, and that's my desktop over here. If, in fact, it's like, I'm going to go ahead and log on to the server from the console, you get disconnected from your client. So it's not a remote control. You do not see the same thing at the same time. You can't use it for, hey, walk me through this troubleshooting thing. That's remote assistance, which is not available in domain controllers. They're completely disabled. So that's how that works. So again, if I want to connect again, it ends up disconnecting my server side. So you have one or the other. If somebody else logged in remote desktop as well, then you would get disconnected. So there's only one connection at a time. But now I do have full control of this. I can not only get to the tools, Active Directories, users, and computers, and see all the stuff that's going on here. But I can also get to like the desktop. I can get to the control panel. I can get to the file system. So you do have a lot more control. It's just a lot less secure than using the RSAT tool. When you disconnect, I can just click the little close box up here, and this will disconnect your session. The session that did get disconnected, like on my server console, doesn't get reconnected automatically, but you can just log in with fine. So how if I log into remote desktop for DC2? Bet you it won't work either. Why not? I haven't enabled it. So how would you enable? How do you enable remote desktop here? we love sconfig, right? Yeah, sconfig number 7. And it says, do you want to enable it or disable it? You hit E for enable. And allow only clients running the remote desktop with network level authentication, which is more secure. So yes, I want to choose number 1. By the way, I think Windows 7, 8, and 10 all have that network level authentication. And it's enabling the remote desktop. And then I can exit back to the command prompt. And now switching over to my client, I connect to DC2. And here, let me just switch this over here as well. Let me put DC2 on this other screen. So there's DC2. And now I connect over here. And just like the other server, it disconnects your server console. So you only get one or the other. So, but now I can see it. I can see exactly where I'm at. I can, do all kinds of DOS commands. I can do ds add if I want to add a user, ds add user. If you're really good at those kinds of commands. I'm not really good at those kinds of commands. But say I am on the console and I do go log back in. It then disconnects your client side of things. So you have to enable remote desktop, which makes things less secure. Just kind of realize that. But it's very, very versatile. I can go to any computer anywhere. On your tablet, they make all kinds of apps, free apps for your cell phone or whatever that uses the RDP protocol. So you can manage your server from pretty much any device from any location. Yeah, TeamViewer is an option as well. The problem with that, though, is that you need you'd have to have the client to then specifically access it and whatever. There's pros and cons for all of those. So any questions on remote management using Remote Server Administration Tool, RSAT? Way more secure, a little bit more restrictive. You have to install it on the client you want to install it to. It's also a little bit more limited. You can't access the file system or the desktop or the actual local machine. The other option is to enable remote desktop access, and then using just the remote desktop protocol to access it from anywhere you want.
But can you?
Yeah, so the question is, so I remote desktop, it's two completely separate things at that point though. So if I, just connect to my domain controller 1, after spelling the password correctly. So I'd have remote desktop going, so I could see what's going on the desktop, or using, well, let's see. Let's try to get Server Manager going here. Server Manager, and here we go. So here's Active Directory users and computers. Somewhere, here they are, all over there. And then I can still use Server Manager as a separate, these are two separate things. This window is a remote desktop window. This would be the window for the application of Server Manager. And here I can do this. If I go to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers, and I go to Accounting, here I have Andrew. So this is Remote Desktop, and this is my local remote Server Manager. I can create a new user called Test. And so it created them here. And again, this just takes forever to refresh, but if you click the refresh button, you now have that. So you're having two different views. This is a view from the server. This is the view. They're looking at the same database from two different computers. From my Windows 10 client is over here, and from the server over there. But they're the same thing. I can go over here and delete this user. And then refresh this screen, and the test user's gone. So it's two different views from two different sides of the database. One database.